Hello everyone, Bag here, and welcome to my complete Tribbie guide. We'll be going over her playstyle, builds, and best teams, so that you can know everything that there is to know about using her to her fullest potential. With that, no stalling, let's get started. Tribbie is a 5-star Quantum Harmony unit that is best played in AoE scenarios, where her potent buffing and respectable personal damage can best shine. Here is a rundown of her kit. Her basic is the same as Jade's. It is a blast attack without any other special properties. Her skill summons a 3-turn field that gives the entire team 24% alt-type respan at rank 10, which as a reference point is the exact same buff as Robin's E1. It should also be noted that this skill is automatically applied at the start of battle thanks to Tribbie's technique. Although unlike something like Ron May's technique, you don't cast the skill at the start of battle to receive extra energy or anything like that. It's instead like Fushuan's technique where the field is already there when the fight starts. Next, let's talk about her talent, which is her follow-up attack. Whenever an ally uses their ultimate, Tribbie will launch an AoE follow-up that does pretty respectable damage. I also want to note that all of her hits, from her basic to her follow-up to her ultimate, all scale off of HP, and she does have a way to increase her own HP that I'll touch on in a bit. Tribbie can only launch one follow-up per ally's ultimate, and this limitation is reset whenever Tribbie herself ults. So in between every Tribbie ult, you can expect to launch a maximum of 3 Tribbie follow-ups, one per teammate. With an ultimate cost of 120, it shouldn't be too hard to spam her ultimate, meaning that if you play things right, you can play your team's rotation around her ultimate timing to maximize the amount of follow-ups that she is able to dish out. So speaking about her ultimate, what does it actually do? Her ultimate starts out with another AoE hit, before then summoning another field, lasting this time for 2 turns. This field increases the damage that the enemies take by 30% at rank 10, which is very potent. Also, while this field is active, Tribbie deals a hit of additional damage to the enemy with the most HP whenever an ally attacks an enemy, and this additional damage is counted per enemy hit. So if an ally hits 5 enemies, this additional damage will trigger 5 times onto the said enemy. If you need a refresher, additional damage is a rather rare damage type that doesn't count as an actual hit towards any mechanics. So this damage won't do stuff like stack Fei Xiao or Mose's passives or anything like that. It's in the same category as Robin's or Jade's additional damage if you're familiar with them. One thing to note about all of Tribbie's buffs is that they are usable by anyone. There aren't any attack or crit buffs that puts her into the niche of buffing a specific carry. Any damage dealer in the game can make use of her extra stats. The fields from her skill and ultimate both count down on her own turn, which makes her work well with units who take a lot of turns, as her buffs will never run out no matter how many turns they take. Next, let's talk about her traces. She first of all has very useful minor traces, with crit rate, crit damage, and HP. For her major traces, her first one gives an insane amount of damage percent to herself, which maxes out after 3 follow-ups. This is just a standard huge self buff, as her innate multipliers are rather low. Her next trace increases her own max HP depending on the entire team's HP while her ultimate field is active. This buff isn't the most important thing that you should build your team around, but it is a nice little bit of damage that you can get on top of certain synergies. Her final major trace is arguably her most important one, as not only does it give her an extra amount of starting energy at the start of a fight, but she also gains 1.5 energy whenever an enemy is hit, and like the additional damage in her ultimate, this is again counted per enemy hit. So if your team hits 5 enemies, then this at a base will regenerate 7.5 energy. Think of this as just being half of the Herder's energy passive, since that's literally what it is. Both of the energy gains from this major trace are affected by her energy regen rate, and as we'll get into later, depending on the build that you run, this trace can dictate both how fast your ultimate rotation is and whether you can get a turn 1 ult or a turn 0 ult at the start of the fight. For a trace leveling priority, as is expected from a support, getting both her skill and ultimate to the max level is essential to get the most out of her buffs, and her follow-up is just behind them as her personal damage is a large amount of her strength. Her basic isn't completely useless to level, but it is by far the least important one to max out. So, what are Tribbie's strengths that she can take advantage of? Well, first off, her large amount of AoE attacks and additional damage gives her some very genuinely serviceable personal damage, especially if you can properly work around her follow-up restriction by giving her enough energy to spam her ultimate. Another boon that I previously mentioned is that her buffs are very universal. It's hard to say right now how important her non-attack buffs will matter for future carries, but it means that no matter who you use her with, she will be providing a good baseline amount of value. She is also the best amper of AoE damage, while also being able to focus down large HP enemies in AoE scenarios, which does fit well into the new Pure Fiction iteration in having a boss with a lot of HP in 2 out of the 3 waves. And lastly, she is also an SP positive support, since she lets off more basic stun skills over the course of the fight, especially at the start of the fight, since her field has its entire duration of 3 turns to burn through before it needs to be refreshed. With that, let's also go through her weaknesses as a unit. For one, a lot of her utility is limited in its full potential outside of AoE scenarios. With anything less than 5 enemies, she is generating less energy for herself, she's dealing less additional damage, and her follow-ups are also dealing less damage since they are hitting less enemies. The energy is a particularly big deal, as she has a lot of fast ultimate teammates that she could be used with that would want her to do more than just her bare minimum of a 2-turn ultimate rotation. Another weakness of hers is that she has no real utility as a support outside of her damage and follow-ups. Her lack of action advancing or energy funneling means that she is playing catch up against her competition, who can make your units take many additional turns throughout a fight. And her last weakness is an offshoot of her last one, as she is not an earth-shatteringly large upgrade for the teams in which she is best in slot. The thing is, her niche in AoE damage is not uncontested by other supporting options. For example, using any other support other than Ranmei or Fugue in break teams will fundamentally make those break teams weaker. But Tribbie, meanwhile, has to contend more with her respective supporting competition in her own designated niche. Her use in an AoE context is not exactly to enable your AoE teams to function at all, but instead her being the marginal best option means that she is great with helping the diversity and flexibility of your supports across your 2 teams. While she is generally still the best buffer of AoE damage, and the best support for that type of content, she doesn't blow her competition out of the water completely, which is kind of the expected standard of a new premium support. That is a very high standard to hold her to, but well, that has been the trend with these type of units. Now, as we go into how to build her, we first have to talk about her different potential playstyles, as the 2 topics go hand in hand. So, first off, her energy. Tribbie doesn't have a conventional chartable energy rotation, since a large portion of her energy is gained from her allies attacking. Depending on her team and the amount of enemies, her ER needs can change drastically. If you are using her in low enemy content, she will need as much ER as possible. But in Pure Fiction with a fast attacking team, she may want to ease off on going all the way into her ER in favor of other utility options. Remember, if a team spams their ultimates or they want her follow-ups as a specific part of her utility, then energy is the top priority of her builds. But the absolute minimum, no matter the build, is to achieve her 2-turn ultimate rotation in order to keep her ultimate field up at all times. There are 3 tiers of energy generation that she can go for: an ER rope, an ER planar effect, and an energy generating light cone. Most of the time, an ER rope is the optimal way to play her as a baseline, as not only does it give her the most amount of energy out of all of her ER options, but it also lets her starting energy trace give her an extra head start, which can let her start cycling her ultimates sooner into the fight. An ER planar is just the same line of thinking as an ER rope, but with less ER, with 5% instead of 19%. I would usually say that if you are using her in the scenarios that you should be playing her in, then ER planar is not absolutely necessary, but you should strongly consider going for it if you just want to make her as comfy as possible. Otherwise, other planers that either boost her own damage or her team's damage will probably get more use. For the former, the new set of 3.1 is slightly better than Salsodo, but they are both very usable if you already have Salsodo farmed. And for the latter, there is the bog standard Keel or Fleet. If you want both team buffing and ER, then you want to use either Lushaka or Penacony, depending on what your team needs. So if you do want her ER to feel as comfy as possible, and you are either supporting an attack scaler or a quantum carry, then these 2 sets can be very good options. Lastly, for her energy, there are the light cone options. She has 4 main options that she can go for. Meshing Cogs or an S5 Memories of the Past each do the same exact thing for her, giving her a 1-turn boost of 8 energy. That is also affected by ER. If you just want the most comfy, standard Tribbie build, Koggers will do just fine for her. Her other options are not needed to compete in endgame content by any means. If you can get memories to S5, it does have slightly higher base HP on top of a mostly useless break effect stat, so while it is a lot less cheap, it is marginally better if you do have it. The next tier up is her signature, so let's go over what it does. Firstly, it has a very expected high base HP, as well as a self crit damage buff for 36%. None of her other Lycone options really help her own personal damage, so if you do prioritize this about her, then that is a very nice bonus. This Lycone also gives a constant 48% crit damage to the entire team, so long as Tribbie does a follow-up every 2 turns, which she will always do, as this stipulation is just there so that other Harmony units without follow-ups can't make use of this Lycone. Lastly, for her energy, she not only gets an extra 21 energy at the start of battle, but she also gains an extra 12 energy per follow-up, which is much more than the 1 to turn 8 energy that her budget options can give her. I do also want to note that with an ER rope, the starting energy that this Lycone gives lets you ult right at the start of the fight, meaning that her very important ultimate field will have theoretically 0 downtime. Now, while this option is obviously the best for her energy and team-wide buffing, it is not nearly as needed to make her work as it was in her initial kit. Like most premium options, it's just a bundle of extra stats that makes her ultra comfortable, but her budget options can already get the job done well enough. I'll go more in detail about her premium options later in the video, but for the context of her energy, it is by far her best option, but in multi-target scenarios, it could be said that it is a bit overkill, which I guess says a lot considering how demanding she is on her energy. And to absolutely nobody's surprise, her last Lycone option is Dance Dance Dance. This is what I meant earlier by her potentially wanting to trade her energy funneling in exchange for other utility. As while this Lycone offers no energy or team-wide buffs, it's DDD. With one of her biggest weaknesses being her lack of turn manipulation, the option to spam DDD if you can cycle her burst fast enough can give her an entire other facet of strength. In short fights in MOC or Apocalyptic Shadow, 1 or 2 DDD procs can be the difference between entire scoring or cycle brackets. So if you can make it work, it's for sure worth going for. And in long fights like in Pure Fiction, a crap ton of DDD procs can add up over time, as if you have 4 entirely optimal DDD uses at S5, that's basically the same amount of action advancing as an entire Robin ultimate, kind of, I guess. For other Lycone options, Planetary Rendezvous is always there if you don't care about her energy and want the buffing for Quantum teammates. Same with Poised to Bloom, although its attack buff is completely useless on her, and Dreamville Adventure can also be used with basic attacking carries. Although if you are looking for free options, then Koggers is right there. Phew! Okay, that was a lot about her energy. The TLDR is that you should mostly go for an ER rope, and after that it depends on how important ultimate spamming is for your team, and how much energy you can give her with your team's rotation. But the ultimate goal is that if you can make DDD work, then that's her optimal scenario outside of her Lycone. Real quick, I am going to be making guides like this from now on, so sub for more if you like this type of content. Most of you who watch my content aren't subscribed, so if you've been watching my content for a while, make sure to see if you're actually subbed. I'm trying to hit 10k within this year, so I'd really appreciate it if you help me reach that goal. Alright, back to the vid. Next, there is the question of whether to play Tribbie fast or slow. Tribbie was made to be a slow support, and there are a couple of advantages that come with fitting into that mold. For one, both of her fields last a lot longer since they count down on her own turn. For two, her personal damage is a lot better if she uses HP boots and if she doesn't need to delegate substats to speed. And for 3, because of her unique energy generation, she doesn't need fast speed to generate energy. So depending on how needy her team is for her follow-ups, it might not be worth it to sacrifice parts of her kit in order to absolutely spam her ultimate as fast as possible. The upsides of playing her fast is that, for 1, she is able to generate SP more quickly, for 2, spamming ultimates lets her spam more DDD, which can potentially mean slightly more moves for a team in a fight, and for 3, if her team is needy for her follow-ups, either because her follow-ups do something unique for the team, or because her team has a lot of one-turn ult spammers, then there is merit of sacrificing parts of her kit to ult more often. The TLDR is that most of the time a slow Tribbie is better, as it lets her fully focus on her damage. And again, she doesn't need speed to function at a high level. But if you do want to play her fast, then you will get something out of it. Okay, so from all of that, now that you know everything about how to build Tribbie, well, how do you actually build Tribbie? If you go for slow Tribbie, the new Quantum set is by far her best relic set. And as said before, if you can use an ER supporting set such as Lushaka or Penacony, then that will make her the most comfortable. Or you can use a damaging set like Bone Collection or Salsodo, with Bone Collection doing a bit more damage since Salsodo doesn't provide a damage boost to her additional damage. Her light cone depends on her energy needs, but generally, Kagura's is the budget option, Memory of the Past is a marginal upgrade if you have it, her signature is a further upgrade for team and self-buffing, and DDD is always there as a way to give her additional important utility. For stats, you'll want to go crit damage on the body since the Quantum set gives so much crit rate, as well as HP boots. An HP orb is slightly better than a quantum damage orb due to her being very oversaturated in damage percent thanks to her second trace for her follow-up, but either can work so just go off of substats, and an ER rope. Maybe an HP rope if you truly do not care about her energy, but I would say that most of the time you really should care about her energy. For a fast Tribbie, you either want the original quantum set for some damage, or the Eagle set for ultra maximum turns. The planar options are mostly the same, but the best new option is probably Von Whack to further jumpstart her energy rotations at the start of the fight. The Lycon options are basically the same, based on if you need extra damage or DDD advancing. You want either crit rate or crit damage on the body, speed boots, the same orb situation as with Slow Tribbie, except now she has less HP with the loss of HP boots, and an ER rope. Okay, so now that we've gone over all of the Tribbie's information, now we need to go through all the context that surrounds her. First, her teams. I made an entire 18-minute video going through all of her teams, so I will keep this very short, as if you want a deeper dive, well, there's a deeper dive. Her best in slot teams are in any pure fiction or AoE teams, besides Rappa and Himiko, where both of them might want break supports more instead. Her universal buffing also works well for the likes of Blade and Maide, although for them she is not nearly as unambiguous when it comes to her being better than RMC. Fei Xiao and all of her teammates can also use her follow-ups pretty well, but this team is just worse than just using Robin instead. Jade, Mini Herda, Linksha, Aventurine, Argenti, Yunli, they all work very well in her optimal AoE scenario, where she is used either as a single support for a sub-DPS team, or a secondary support for a hypercarry team, where the primary support does the heavy lifting in the utility department in order to best activate the carry strength. She is also the best in slot support for the Herda, thanks to her follow-ups actually having a unique niche here in generating energy for the Herda and funneling interpretation stacks onto the enemy. But as is the case with all the units mentioned, she isn't insanely ahead of the supporting competition like you would expect from a premium support in their designated niche. She is the best, but RMC, Sunday, or Robin can all be comparable due to the Herda generating more energy for herself thanks to the extra turns that they all give. This is part of why DDD can be so important for Tribbie, so depending on the build, this disparity might not be as damning for her. Her other semi-notable niches are with HP scalers thanks to her universal buffing, and Fei Xiao teams thanks to her follow-ups, although there Robin is still the better option due to their single target nature having a bit of anti-synergy with her utility. Other than that, her universal damage buffs means that she is usable with literally any carry. Just make sure that you have all the necessary supports for a given carry to make them usable before you add Tribbie to the team. Lastly, let's go over her Eidolons. Her first Eidolon is by far her most powerful one, and it can be a bit difficult to understand at first. What it does is that it takes all of your damage you do to the enemy and it converts it into 24% proportional to damage onto whoever is being targeted by Tribbie's additional damage. So say you deal 1,000,000 damage to the enemy, the specific targeted enemy will then take a guaranteed extra 240,000 damage. Against one enemy, this is a straight up damage increase of 24%, and against 5 enemies, the value only goes higher. It's not consistent of how much more damage it is, since some units have AoE attacks that hits every enemy equally, and some units have attacks that hit the center units stronger than the edge units, like the Herda. But it is generally a very large single target damage increase for AoE carries. This is specifically very good for units who struggle with wasting a lot of their damage by overkilling weaker, smaller mobs, like maybe Acheron, Yunli, Argenti, or the Herda. But every carry will be able to be a lot stronger with this Eidolon. Separate from how strong Tribbie is, I think this is the strongest premium support Eidolon in the game, so I would heavily consider picking it up if you are interested in her premium options. Since her cheap Lycon options can contest with her signature in what issues they solve, I think it's pretty simple that her E1 gives more value. Of course, Lycons are always cheaper to go for, which does matter in this recommendation, but this is a case where I would still recommend her E1 over her signature even with that consideration. Her E2 massively increases her additional damage from her ultimate, making the hit deal 120% of the original damage, while also putting an additional hit into however many hits she would normally deal. This is a sizable increase into her personal damage, but in my opinion, it's not nearly as impactful as her other cheaper premium options. Her E4 makes it so that her skill field makes allies ignore 18% of the enemy's defense. This is probably the most bog standard support Eidolon in the game, and I'd say it's especially good as usually a character's E4 is pretty useless. So if you are investing a lot into Tribbie, then at least it won't be for nothing. Finally, her E6 lets her follow-up go off after her own ultimate, while also increasing the follow-up scaling by 729%. If that sounds like a random number, it's 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, or 3 to the 6th powered, because there's 3 of her, I guess, I don't know. Anyways, it's a typical broken Eidolon at E6. It's insane, but also not that unexpected. Of course this makes her personal damage absolutely absurd, so as I said with her E4, if you go for it then you won't be disappointed, but generally, obviously I wouldn't recommend getting 7 copies of Tribbie for this, but I mean, duh. And that's everything I have to say about Tribbie. Again, if you want more details on who works well with her, then check out my teammate tier list for her. And also, I do want to clarify that all of this guide is working off of pre-release numbers and theory crafting. So if things turn out differently, or if it turns out that I got something wrong, then please check the pinned comment for any corrections or addendums. And also, follow my Twitch for when I'm live. I'm trying to be more consistent with streaming, and I'd love it if you drop by to say hi. With that, make sure to subscribe. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye!